Emma walked slowly along the busy street, her old sneakers brushing the sidewalk with soft steps. The morning sun was warm, and she held a small paper bag with a few groceries in one hand. She wasn't in a rush. She had time. Her husband was in a meeting, and she had promised herself a quiet day of window shopping. Just looking, nothing more. As she reached the boutique, she paused. It was one of those fancy stores with large glass windows, shiny gold handles, and spotless floors. The mannequins inside wore clothes that looked like they belonged in magazines. Emma smiled to herself. She had always liked looking at pretty things, even if she couldn't buy them. With a deep breath, she pushed the door open. A small bell rang overhead. The store was quiet. Cool air brushed her face, and soft music played from hidden speakers. Emma stepped inside, careful not to make noise. She looked at a dress hanging nearby. It was soft, light blue, and reminded her of clear skies. Just as she reached out to gently touch the fabric, a woman in a black suit appeared beside her. She had a sharp look in her eyes and a thin smile that didn't feel kind. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, her voice flat. Emma gave a small smile. "No, thank you. I'm just looking." The woman nodded, but her eyes stayed on Emma. She looked her up and down, taking in her cardigan, her jeans, and her shoes. Her smile faded even more. "Just so you know," the woman said, "our items are quite expensive. We don't want anything to happen to them." Emma blinked, surprised by the tone. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could say anything, another voice joined in. "Is there a problem?" It was the manager, tall and dressed in a dark suit. He looked at Emma like she didn't belong there. "No problem," the woman said quickly, just letting her know. The manager nodded slowly, then turned to Emma. "We have a policy against loitering. If you're not buying, we kindly ask you not to stay long." The words felt heavy in the air. Emma looked at the dress one last time, then stepped back. Her heart felt a little tight in her chest, but she kept her face calm. Without saying a word, she turned and walked toward the door. As she stepped outside, the bell above the door rang again. Behind her, two customers whispered and giggled. Emma didn't look back. She sat down on a bench near the sidewalk and stared at the people walking by. The sun still shone, but something about the day had changed. She held her phone in her hands but didn't move. The boutique, with its gold handles and shiny windows, stood behind her like a wall she wasn't meant to pass. Emma sat quietly on the bench just outside the boutique. Her hands rested in her lap, holding her phone gently, though she hadn't looked at the screen yet. People walked by, some in groups, some alone, all dressed in stylish clothes, talking, laughing, carrying shopping bags from different stores. No one really noticed her sitting there, but she felt like everyone could see how out of place she was. A small breeze moved her hair, and she brushed it back without thinking. Her eyes stayed fixed on the sidewalk, watching the shoes of strangers pass by. Some wore shiny heels, others clean white sneakers, and one child in bright red sandals skipped beside her mother. Emma's thoughts returned to the moment inside the boutique. The woman's voice still echoed in her head. "If you're not buying." The words made her feel small, like she didn't belong in that space. She had only wanted to look around, maybe admire the dress, maybe see something nice for later. But now it all felt like a mistake. She took a deep breath and finally looked at her phone. There was a message thread open from earlier that morning. Her husband had sent her a simple text, "Call me if you need anything." She stared at the message for a few seconds, her thumb hovering over the screen. But she didn't type anything yet. She didn't want to complain. She wasn't hurt, at least not on the outside. But inside, she felt something heavy, a mix of embarrassment, sadness, and confusion. She had done nothing wrong, yet she had been treated like a problem, like she didn't belong. Behind her, through the glass of the boutique, she could still see the workers inside. The same woman who had spoken to her was now laughing with another customer. The manager was folding clothes neatly, acting like nothing had happened. It was like Emma had already been forgotten. A couple of teenagers walked past and glanced at her. One of them whispered something to the other, and they both laughed. Emma looked down at her shoes, suddenly aware of every scuff and crease on them. She had worn them for years, and they were still comfortable, but now they felt too old, too plain. She sighed quietly and finally typed a short message. Just finished looking. I'll wait outside. She didn't mention what had happened. She didn't want to cause a fuss. Maybe it was better to just let it go. Emma leaned back against the bench, trying to enjoy the sun again. But the warmth didn't feel the same. She looked up at the sky, searching for something to focus on. Clouds moved slowly, and the soft sound of traffic filled the air. She didn't know it yet, but her day was far from over. Something was about to happen, something that would change the way everyone in that boutique remembered her. The morning had started like any other. Emma woke up to the sound of the alarm ringing softly in the background, the pale light of dawn filtering through the window. She stretched, yawning a little, then slid out of bed, careful not to wake her husband. Theo, still asleep, had his arm thrown over the pillow where she had been. She smiled and quietly got dressed, pulling on a pair of comfortable jeans and a light sweater she had worn many times before. As she moved through the small kitchen, she prepared a quick breakfast, toast with butter, a little bit of jam. She liked simple mornings like this. Nothing too busy, just the rhythm of a calm start. Theo, always the early riser, was already in the kitchen when she walked in, holding his mug of coffee. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm and familiar. "You sleep well?" "Yes," Emma replied, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Though it was hard to fall asleep with all the thoughts in my head." "Same here," he said with a small chuckle. "But the meeting today should be quick, so we can go for a walk after. I'll be done by noon." "Sounds perfect," Emma said, reaching for the butter. "I'm just going to check out a few shops later. No big plans, just looking around." Theo paused for a moment, watching her spread the jam on her toast. "You know," he said, "you've been working hard lately. Why don't you let me take you shopping today? Get something nice for yourself. You deserve it." Emma shook her head. "Oh, I'm fine. Just window shopping today. Nothing too fancy." Theo smiled, though there was a hint of concern in his eyes. "If you say so. Just make sure you take a break and relax. You don't need to spend all your time working or worrying." "I'll be fine," Emma said, giving him a reassuring smile. "Besides, I don't really want anything expensive. I like the little things." "Okay, but if you change your mind, I'll be around," he said. "Just text me." They ate together, chatting about small things, the weather, a recent movie they watched, plans for the weekend. There was nothing special about the conversation, but it felt comfortable, the kind of routine that made mornings feel grounded. After breakfast, Theo kissed her on the forehead and grabbed his briefcase. "I'll see you later, Em. Take care of yourself." "I will," she said with a smile, watching him leave the house. He was always busy, always working, but he made sure to check in on her. It was something she appreciated, even if she never said it out loud. As Theo's car pulled out of the driveway, Emma cleaned up the dishes, then put on her coat. She wasn't in a hurry. There was no reason to rush today. After all, she had the whole day ahead of her. She stepped out the door and into the quiet morning, the air fresh and cool against her face. Little did she know, the day would unfold in a way she never expected. What started as a peaceful, calm morning would soon become something else entirely. Inside the boutique, the soft hum of the air conditioning blended with the faint sound of classical music playing in the background. The store was still and quiet, except for the quiet chatter of two sales assistants near the back. They were folding clothes neatly, their hands moving in smooth, practiced motions, but their conversation was anything but calm. "Did you see her?" one of them whispered, not trying to hide the sharpness in her voice. "Yeah," the other replied, her tone matching the first. "She looked so out of place. Those shoes, they looked like they'd been through years of wear." They both glanced toward the front of the store, where Emma had stood just moments before, her eyes scanning the shelves. They hadn't noticed her leaving. The thought of a woman dressed in simple clothes stepping into their pristine boutique made them uncomfortable, though neither of them could quite say why. "I don't think she could afford anything here," the first sales assistant said with a small laugh. "I bet she just wandered in because she thought it looked nice." "I'm glad she left. We don't have time for people who just want to look around," the other replied, shaking her head. "We're a high-end store, not some department store for window shoppers." Their voices lowered even more as they continued to discuss Emma. They had no idea she was sitting outside on the bench, listening to the faint murmurs drifting from inside the store. Emma didn't turn around, though. She didn't want to. She had heard enough. What bothered her wasn't just the fact that they had judged her. It was that they hadn't given her a chance to explain. She hadn't even said a word when they'd spoken to her. She had simply tried to look around, nothing more. Across the street, a man in a dark suit walked past the boutique. He paused for a moment, noticing the name of the store on the large glass door. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he quickly pulled it out, checking a new message. His attention was drawn away from the store as he glanced at the time. Then, with a swift movement, he tucked the phone back into his jacket and continued walking. Inside, the sales assistants hadn't noticed the man at all. They were too focused on their conversation, oblivious to how their words had reached the street. They didn't notice the quiet tension growing just outside their perfect glass doors. Meanwhile, Emma's eyes flicked toward the street as she tried to focus on something, anything, other than the whispered comments she had overheard. She knew the boutique wasn't for her. She knew it was out of her reach, yet it still stung. It stung because it felt like the judgment wasn't just about clothes or money. It felt like they had judged her as a person. Emma took a deep breath and slowly stood up from the bench. She didn't need their approval. She didn't need their judgment. All she wanted was to spend a peaceful day. But now that day was slipping through her fingers. She started walking down the sidewalk, her steps slow but steady, as the sounds of the boutique faded behind her. 1 hour had passed since Emma left the boutique, and the quiet outside felt strangely comforting, even if the sting of the earlier encounter lingered. She hadn't planned to walk far, but as the minutes ticked by, she found herself drifting down the street, her mind occupied with thoughts that kept her from noticing much around her. The sound of her footsteps on the pavement was steady, and the sun overhead remained bright, but the feeling of being unnoticed was hard to shake. She passed a few small shops, some selling books, others with fresh flowers out front. The day felt endless, and yet time seemed to move too quickly. She checked her phone again, but there were no new messages. She tucked it back into her pocket and stopped by a small park bench, where she sat and looked out at the street. The hustle and bustle around her didn't feel as lively anymore. It felt distant. Just as she sighed and looked down at her shoes, the sound of a sleek black SUV pulling up to the curb caught her attention. It wasn't the usual noise of an ordinary car. This was different, quieter, more commanding. Emma didn't notice right away who was inside, but she could see the driver, a man in a suit who seemed to be paying close attention to the surroundings. The car stopped directly across from where she was sitting, and the driver stepped out with a purposeful air. The man glanced quickly at the street and then turned his focus on Emma. She hadn't expected to be noticed by anyone today, let alone by someone who looked so serious. As the door opened, a familiar voice called out her name. Emma? Her head turned instinctively, and there he was, her husband, Theo, stepping out of the SUV. He looked around briefly before his eyes locked on hers, and his face softened. There was a moment of surprise before he quickly crossed the street and approached her. Hey, are you all right? Theo's voice was calm but concerned. He glanced at the boutique in the distance. I saw you leave the store. Everything okay? Emma looked up at him, a little surprised by his sudden arrival. She hadn't expected him to be here, especially not now. I'm fine, she said, though her voice was quiet. Just needed some fresh air. Theo raised an eyebrow, but didn't press further. I'm glad you're okay. I had a quick break between meetings, so I thought I'd check in. You sure you're all right? Emma gave him a small nod, still unsure of what to say. She hadn't wanted to make a scene, and yet here he was, looking at her with that familiar protective expression. It was clear he hadn't missed what had happened, but she wasn't ready to talk about it. I'm fine, she repeated, standing up slowly. It's just been one of those days, I guess. Theo gave her a small smile, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. How about we go somewhere else? Take a little break. Get away from all this. He motioned toward the boutique and the people walking by. I can always use some air too. Emma hesitated for a moment, but the warmth in Theo's tone made her feel a little lighter. She glanced at the black SUV again, then back at Theo. She nodded. Yeah, that sounds nice, she said softly. With that, they began walking toward the car, and for the first time in hours, Emma felt the weight on her shoulders lift just a little. As Emma and Theo walked toward the black SUV, the air felt lighter, the tension from earlier starting to fade. The quiet hum of the city surrounded them, but Theo's presence was a comforting shield against the sting of the past hour. Emma glanced at him, unsure of what to say, but Theo remained quiet, as if he understood she needed some time. They reached the SUV, and Theo opened the door for her. She slid into the seat, grateful for the calm, but she could feel her thoughts swirling. Theo got in on the other side, starting the engine, and pulled out into the street. For a moment, they drove in silence, the sound of tires on the road filling the space between them. Emma watched the familiar buildings and shops pass by, but her mind kept drifting back to the boutique. The way she'd been treated, how she'd been made to feel so out of place. It was hard to forget. She hadn't expected anything to happen when she went in. She hadn't expected to be judged before she even had a chance to look around. "You sure you're okay?" Theo asked, breaking the silence. His voice was soft, but there was a hint of concern in it. Emma took a deep breath, then nodded. "Yeah, I'm just thinking. It's nothing really." "It doesn't seem like nothing," Theo said, glancing at her before focusing back on the road. "I saw how you looked when you left the store." Emma felt a knot form in her stomach, but she didn't want to talk about it. "Not yet. I don't want to make a big deal out of it," she said quietly. "You don't have to make a big deal," Theo replied, his tone understanding. "But I want you to know that no one has the right to treat you that way. I don't care where we are or what store it is. You deserve respect." Emma wasn't sure how to respond. She appreciated his words, but she didn't know if it would change anything. It wasn't about what they'd said or how they looked at her. It was the feeling that came with it. The feeling of being small, unnoticed, and unwanted. As Theo turned onto another street, the car slowed to a stop in front of a different shop. Emma didn't recognize it, but the sign out front was simple and inviting. It wasn't a high-end boutique like the last one. It was a small, cozy store with large windows and a welcoming feel. She could see people browsing inside, chatting with the shopkeeper, looking at items with no sense of judgment. Theo parked the SUV and turned to Emma. "Let's check this place out. I think it might be more your style." Emma hesitated for a moment, then smiled. It wasn't the type of store she would have normally gone to, but maybe that was exactly what she needed. No judgment, just a place where she could look without feeling like she had to prove anything. She nodded. "Yeah, let's." They both stepped out of the SUV and walked into the shop together. As soon as they entered, the warmth inside felt different. There was no cold air of superiority, just the pleasant, quiet atmosphere of a small, friendly store. Emma's shoulders relaxed as she looked around. Maybe, just maybe, this was the kind of place she had been searching for all along. The small shop was nothing like the boutique Emma had just left. As soon as she stepped inside, the atmosphere felt warm and welcoming. The soft chime of the doorbell echoed as she and Theo entered. The shop was cozy, with wooden shelves neatly arranged along the walls, each shelf filled with an assortment of items: handmade jewelry, small potted plants, vintage books, and beautiful scarves. The air smelled faintly of lavender and cedarwood, a calm, earthy scent that immediately made Emma feel at ease. A woman behind the counter looked up with a smile. Her hair was tied back in a loose bun, and she wore a simple blue apron over her clothes. She greeted them with a friendly nod. "Welcome. Feel free to take your time and have a look around." Emma smiled back, feeling the tension in her shoulders begin to melt away. She glanced at Theo, who gave her a small nod, signaling that they were both welcome here. No judgment. He didn't need to say anything. His presence was enough. They wandered through the shop slowly, taking in the calming atmosphere. Emma ran her fingers over a basket of soft, hand-woven scarves, the fabric light and smooth under her touch. Each item felt like it had a story, something unique and special. There were no expensive price tags demanding attention, no high-end labels. Just simple, beautiful things made with care. "This is nice," Emma said softly, her fingers brushing over a small wooden box with intricate carvings on it. It wasn't fancy or perfect, but it felt real, like it belonged here. "I knew you'd like it," Theo replied with a smile. He walked over to a shelf of vintage books and picked one up. The cover was worn, its edges slightly frayed. He flipped through the pages, scanning the text with a look of interest. It was the kind of place where things didn't have to be brand new or shiny. Everything had a story to tell, even the smallest of objects. They continued to explore, moving from one corner of the store to another. Emma found a small table filled with handmade candles in various colors and scents. She picked up a lavender-scented one, inhaling its calming fragrance. It reminded her of quiet evenings spent reading, the kind of peaceful moments she longed for. As they wandered through the store, Emma began to feel a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in a long time. No one was judging her here. No one was giving her a look that made her feel small or out of place. Here, she was simply another person browsing through items, enjoying the peaceful atmosphere. It was a relief. The shopkeeper approached them again, this time holding a small wooden keychain in her hand. "This one's a local favorite," she said with a smile. "It's simple, but it carries a lot of meaning for many who visit the town." Emma looked at the keychain. It was small, shaped like a bird with delicate wings. She smiled. It was perfect in its simplicity. "I'll take it," she said, her voice quiet but content. As she paid for the keychain, she felt a shift in herself. The earlier feelings of discomfort and judgment had faded. This small store had shown her that there was a place for everyone, no matter how different or out of place they might feel at times. Here she was accepted. Here she belonged. After leaving the small shop, Emma felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in hours. The sun had started to dip lower in the sky, casting a soft golden light over the street. The weight on her shoulders had lightened, and her steps felt more steady, as if she had found something she had been missing without even realizing it. Theo had driven them to the little shop without saying much, but now, as they walked together toward the car, it felt as though things were starting to make sense. Emma glanced at him and smiled, feeling grateful for the quiet support he had offered. There had been no pressure to explain herself, no questions about what had happened earlier, just a simple gesture to help her find a new place where she could be herself. As they reached the sub, Theo opened the door for her once more, his usual calm expression still on his face. Emma got in and buckled her seatbelt, feeling strangely light. The car started up, and Theo pulled out into the street, driving them down a quieter road that led away from the busy shopping areas. "How do you feel now?" Theo asked after a moment, his voice gentle. "Better," Emma replied honestly. "I think I just needed to be somewhere that didn't make me feel out of place." "I understand," Theo said, his eyes on the road ahead. "Sometimes we get caught up in places or people who don't really see us for who we are. It can make us doubt ourselves." Emma nodded, looking out the window as the scenery changed from busy streets to quieter, tree-lined roads. The colors of the evening sky were softening, and she found herself relaxing into the quiet of the moment. She hadn't realized how much the earlier experience had weighed on her until she started to let go of it. "I don't think it's just about the store, though," Emma said after a while, her voice thoughtful. "It's about how we let ourselves be treated, right? I mean, I let those people make me feel like I didn't belong." "It's easy to do," Theo agreed, "especially when we don't expect it. But it's important to remember that we don't have to accept how others treat us. We can choose what we let in, what we let affect us." Emma let his words sink in. She had spent so much time trying to fit into certain places, trying to be accepted in ways that didn't always align with who she truly was. But after the calm, welcoming atmosphere of the shop, she realized something important. She didn't need to force herself into places where she didn't feel comfortable. There were spaces in the world where she could be accepted just as she was. No need to pretend or apologize. As they continued to drive, Emma felt a sense of calm settle over her. She wasn't going to let the opinions of a few people define her or her day. She had learned something valuable today, that being true to herself was enough, and that in the end was all that mattered. When Theo turned the car toward home, Emma knew she was ready to face whatever came next with a fresh perspective, one where she valued herself, no matter where she was.